Hi, everyone. So this is our first of 3 NNIP showcases. We're a really generous audience. That's what I've told all of the presenters who volunteered. The showcase is 5 minutes, rapid fire presentations. The slides are auto timed, so people have to be on their toes. These are great opportunities for staff to talk about projects, changes, strategies, anything they want to share with you. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentations, so be thinking about questions. We're going to hold them till the very end. All right, everyone ready to get started? So we're going to start with Anthony. He's going to come up and present first.
Sure. I'm Anthony Galvan at the Institute for Urban Policy Research at UT Dallas. And there it goes. I'm going to talk about some of the work that we do with high school and college students. So first, like, why do we do youth programming at all? I'm just going to grab this. Basically, we know that youth inherit a world that with a lot of policies that affect them, they don't necessarily have the tools to make those changes. And so what we want to do is equip students with the tools to analyze their world and to advocate for the change that they want to see. And we think that it's our duty to be a part of that. So one of the things we want to do too is look at equitable delivery. So not just using an equity lens, but making sure that the students that we're reaching are come from sort of diverse backgrounds, right? We know that a lot of jobs now are requiring data analysis, and a lot of the work that's being done in the public sector is requiring that, and so we feel like we're in a place to sort of bring what NNIP does to young people and to people of color. And so this is a couple of the programs we've had for high school students, a program called Young Leaders Strong City. So in high school programming, we've kind of done 2 different models. One is self-hosted, so hosted at the university or at a public venue. Enrollment's open to any area high school students. And what that means is that the students are in the custody of the university. It requires like permission slips and stuff. It's hard to get students there. Requires independent funding because we don't charge students to be there. Then we do partner hosted, where a partner agency like a school district or a youth serving nonprofit like the YMCA would host it. And then enrollment is closed to the people that they already serve. The students are thus in the custody of that organization. It's a lot easier to do partner hosted events. It's a lot less liability for our organization, and it's cheaper. Transportation can be provided by the partner organization, and usually they provide the funding, so we're not having to fundraise for a program for students since we don't charge for them. So the model in that program has been, it's really utilized a teach-in model where we bring in community members and community leaders to talk about issues of racial and social justice with these high school students. And so it's a lot like this. There's a plenary, there's breakout sessions. The breakout sessions are interactive. And a lot of students will come, multiple years in a row, and then we encourage them to come back and to facilitate sessions, sort of like the camp sessions we do here when they're alums. They've also mobilized some things in their own communities and schools. On the other hand, the Dallas Urban Futures Summit was sort of the first kind of college-focused event that we had last month. And so this was proposed by 2 undergraduate students, and so they were a big part of planning and organizing this event. They participated in sort of both strategic and administrative roles. Other students served as volunteers on the day of. They provided other support like graphic design and social media. One of the other things that working with college students does is it brings in another line of funding. There are student organizations that will fund events that we don't have access to that money because we're not students or student organizations. But some of the challenges working with youth, so with high school students, there's an issue with liability of working with minors, the insurance costs for the events, difficulty fundraising when you have no entrance fee, and then also difficulty of getting people to show up when they're not invested in being there monetarily. With college students, right, college students are flaky. Student organizations and their money are also flaky. Balancing responsibilities among students and staff, and defining ownership and having a plan when students graduate, right? If students, we want them to feel like they're really a part of the program, but then when they leave, do you have a plan for how they can or cannot participate in it after they leave the university? So future programming that we intend to do, we're working with the local YMCA who coordinates the Model United Nations and Youth in Government. And so we're going to put on an event for the participants of those two programs. And then also for college students, we are looking to start a student group for students who want to be a part of planning future events that are student-oriented and who would collaborate with our institute in that work. We're also exploring the possibility of some hands-on policy and data workshops in both undergraduate and graduate classes. And that's the end. So.
Thank you so much. I just want to make a plug for, we've continued to do work through NNIP about working with students and some of the best practices. We had a plenary session about it maybe a year ago, and we also published a guide to working with students, so some of the best practices gathered from partners. So that's my plug for that. Next, we're doing something that we've done in the past, which is a new partner showcase. So Sarah Duda is going to come up here and introduce our new Chicago partner.
Hello. Great. Can people hear me? I will use this moment to take a breath. This is about how fast I can talk. Excellent. So I'm with the Institute for Housing Studies. We are an applied research center based at DePaul University in Chicago. And our mission is to provide reliable, impartial, and timely data and information to help inform housing and community development policy and practice. Our applied research model is grounded in community engagement. If I had more than 5 minutes, I'd tell you all about it. But my presentation is going to be an introduction to IHS with really talking about how we work through an example of our mapping displacement pressure analysis and how we've connected it to equitable transit-oriented development strategies. You're taking my time. Okay, so no, so Jeff Smith, my colleague, presented this map at NNIP in Atlanta. Basically, we developed an analysis to try to identify where in the city do we have the intersection of vulnerability to displacement for residents and also rising costs. The goal was to create a leading indicator to inform conversations about displacement citywide. We are partnering with lots of different organizations to apply this on the ground. One is Elevated Chicago. They're trying to advance racial equity citywide, but in particular around these transit hubs, e-hubs, where they're doing equitable transit-oriented development. So each of these areas has some kind of displacement pressure. They all have a common interest to advance investment and that have that investment benefit the existing residents. So we're doing data-focused technical assistance across all of these different markets with partners on the ground and then elevated more broadly. In strong markets, which is what we're focusing here in Logan Square, by the way, high cost is in pink, moderate cost is in green, and then lower cost areas are in blue. In really strong markets, the concern is that there's really not a lot of vulnerable population left. These areas are significantly already gentrified. So the strategy around mitigating future displacement is really about preserving affordability in the surrounding market. So we're trying to develop parcel level indicators of potential long-term ownership. This is a goal to identify the naturally occurring affordable housing stock and to then be able to help the partner target specific geographies that they can think of land trust strategies, for example, or the acquisition of small rental properties to keep them affordable into the long term. So that's one way in which we're partnering with on-the-ground organizations through Elevated. We are also working in Little Village. This is an area of the city that looks a lot different than Logan Square. It doesn't actually look that different from Logan Square 10 years ago. This is a community that has basically a mix of lower cost and moderate cost displacement pressure. There are resident vulnerability, there's rising costs, there's also proximity to strong markets, there's transit, there's all of this alignment that we would be concerned about increased displacement pressure when we invest. And in fact, there is a planned large-scale public investment in the neighborhood, and that's the El Paseo Trail, which is a elevated, it's actually ground level, but rails to trails project. And so we're working with partners on the ground through Elevated to be able to understand the specific displacement pressure that's occurring in the neighborhood, And also, what is the nature of resident vulnerability? So do we have lots of renters? Where do they live? Where are the seniors? Can we think about what is the particular targeted proactive policy to mitigate displacement in that neighborhood? We're also working in East Garfield Park. This is a neighborhood that has, actually, if you look, it's lots of blue. And those are lower cost areas that actually, when we think about displacement, they've had the most significant displacement in Chicago, not through elevated rising costs, but through disinvestment, historic and pervasive disinvestment. So 100% of our population loss in the city was in these blue areas. So really thinking about how to advance investment in this community that benefits the place and the people was really critical. We are partnering with folks on the ground to understand sort of what additional data are needed that they need to advance some strategies. One thing that we've noticed, we've done this displacement pressure analysis twice, we update it annually, is that a specific portion of East Garfield Park jumped from being low cost to moderate cost in just a year. So we're seeing rising prices in this census tract, and we're working with partners on the ground to understand what additional data they need to understand displacement risk in that area. What's next? We update this annually. We update a lot of different indicators at the Institute annually, and that's so that our partners have up-to-date information about ongoing market conditions in their communities. Critical part of our model is working with partners on the ground to develop data and information, so we're constantly innovating on this model. And we're trying to connect it to other issues beyond housing, community development, to other place-based issues. And if you're really quick, you can read about them there or ask me about them later. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So next we have a presentation from Camille Seabury of Data Haven, who's doing really innovative stuff, too innovative for me. So Camille is gonna make one adjustment and then get started.
Hi everybody, I'm Camille Seabury. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Data Haven in New Haven, Connecticut. Oh, that's not the right way to do it. Oh, this is fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about developing software at your organization, and software is a really broad term. For me, I'm generally working in the R programming language. So I built up a couple libraries of code, and I'll explain that in a second, to help prep us for our community index that we do every 3 years, and we've kind of scaled it up, so I needed to build up more infrastructure for it. One of the big things I was trying to avoid was having just spreadsheets all over the place and no sense of where things came from. And so what I wanted was instead to have a couple libraries of code so that everybody would have the same information. So I had 2 big things happen last year that shifted my thinking on this. One was I went to visit my mom for Mother's Day, and my laptop got stolen. And I lost not big, cool projects, but the like little behind the scenes pieces of information that enable big, cool projects. And the other thing was that I moved to Baltimore, so I'm now working remotely. And so those 2 things meant that I had to kind of adapt how I was doing things while building up the foundation for these major publications. So a library in just kind of any programming language is kind of a bundle of resources. They might all work together on a theme. So those at the bottom were all the libraries that I loaded to write the code that made these slides. And so when you start thinking in terms of algorithms, you'll see things that you just do every day, like what things do I need in order to leave the house, in terms of steps that you build up together, parameters that you feed in, and then you get some sort of output. So one example would be just the list of things that you need before you leave the house. A lot of times functions, they'll serve a lot of different purposes. One major thing, so one thing that I do probably at least a dozen times a day is have to pull ACS data from the same table, but for a whole bunch of different geographies. So normally I would have to do that with a ton of different function calls, and it's a mess. Instead, I packaged it up into one function. I can adjust things as I need, and then that's it. It's nice and clean and legible. Functions are also useful for when you write some code and then you forget how you did it, and then you need to go back and do the same sort of thing. So being able to format numbers to do breaks on a chart. And these 2 examples of my use of that function that I wrote, totally different formats of numbers, but I built in a way to make it adapt to different situations. You can also use whatever code, tools, software, whatever it is that you're developing to help encourage good habits. So things like plotting your data really quickly before you try and talk about it. So this, just a single function call, gives me, a nice, neat plot of that data. I also built in a theme for doing charts, so that kind of to make it easier to go from looking at data to then sketching charts to then finalizing them and then going into production, could have kind of a clean, uniform look. And then I also built in a whole bunch of data sets and references, shape files, things like that. A lot of the things that were lost on my old laptop that otherwise were just kind of scattered and not standardized, and you don't otherwise know, is this the right lookup table for this thing, or is this one the right one? So I built those into these two packages, and now you have access with just a single line of code to like, oh, here's our village to town lookup, here's the neighborhoods in New Haven plotted out on a map. And then another thing that I wanted us to have was just quick access without having to dig through Fact Finder a million times a day to the table, the ACS table numbers and decennial table numbers of tables that we use a lot. So instead of having to dig through Fact Finder, I can just say, okay, I need the poverty by age table. And I have that saved, and so then I can just kind of work through those things that I do. Again, things that I do every day that I just want to have really standard and quick. So that was the fun part of doing this. Then the hard and also kind of boring part is testing and documenting. So you need to test basically everything, because everything is going to break, and it's going to break in ways that you don't expect it to break. You also, and so you test things yourself, you build automated tests, you get your colleagues to test things for you, and then you document everything, because if it's not documented, nobody will use it. You won't even use it yourself. So I built up websites of just documentation for these. So in conclusion, this was a considerable investment of my time. This was about a month and a half at least that I mostly was just working on this. But I would argue, is totally paid off. As far as just making things easier for us to build up this process. So like I said, I wrote code to do this, so if you wanted, for whatever reason, to mess around with any of that code, it's on our GitHub. So you can see it, mess around with it, download it, anything. All right, thanks.
And Camille, at some point you did an ACSR webinar for NNIP. And it's outdated now. Maybe time for a new one. Yeah, I also want to say I appreciate those memes. And on Twitter too, whoever's been making memes. I appreciate them. Our last presenter is going to give an introduction NNIP showcase to Milwaukee. So put your hands together for Caricas Vallejo.
We are so happy that you all made it to Milwaukee. So I'm Carrie Cosvallejo. I work at Data You Can Use with Katie Gerardo and a team who we'll be showing pictures of in a couple minutes. We're glad you were here this month because this is our 1 month of good weather. And for anyone who doesn't know in the room yet, sorry, more? Okay. All right, Data You Can Use is Milwaukee's National Neighborhood Indicator Partners affiliate. We are small but mighty. We work mostly with other nonprofits and foundations, and we help them access, analyze, translate, interpret, and present data. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary, so happy birthday to us. One of the ways that we've found a lot of success in working with our partners is hosting events where we talk about data. We have 2 kind of primary events that we've been running. Hugs, which are health user data groups, which happen quarterly, and data days. I think most of the people in the room are familiar with a data day, but I'm learning that they can look pretty different city to city. Our data day has focused on exposure to several local projects using showcases, skill builders, and panels. And last year, the city of Milwaukee used our data day to announce their city open data portal going live. Hugs are more informal lunches where 2 presenters discuss data topics that are a little bit more in depth. We've used visualizing beach safety, domestic violence, and a special needs registry. for services. In the last year, our team has partnered with agencies and looked at school data, human trafficking, leveraging clients' expertise to improve programming. But I'm going to highlight the Indicators Project. First, it's kind of an effort to expand upon a market value analysis that begun with the city and the Community Development Alliance. The original effort was really focused on place data, especially costs regarding housing, and our work with the city and other stakeholders has really tried to bring in the people data to give that place data some extra context. So far, we have maps on indicators that include population, equity and access, and market value. The other piece that I'd like to touch on lightly is turning the corner. We were very happy to be one of the 5 cities that got to participate in this project, and this spring we published our pieces, which include a full report, neighborhood-specific briefs, and neighbor demographic reports. Both of the neighborhoods that are featured in the reports, Walker's Point and Brewers Hill, are going to be neighborhood tours tomorrow evening. The Walker's Point tour is going to focus on the neighborhood's economic change from its history as an industrial area to trendy restaurants that are now moving in. The neighborhood change in Walker's Point was especially apparent in commercial and business change because this is an area that is kind of repurposed industrial and there weren't that many residents. The Brewers Hill and MLK Drive tour is going to talk more about residents and the racial historical change that it has happened at least twice in that neighborhood's history. This area of the city has always been residential, but the population has changed, and so have the businesses that exist along the commercial corridors. The third neighborhood tour, which is not a turning the corner of the neighborhood, is Lindsay Heights, and we'll be discussing the holistic health and wellness focus within the 53205 zip code. For instance, the economic drive in this neighborhood includes an established community green space and garden and an agricultural market. All 3 of the neighborhood tour options will feature work we've done with local partners and opportunities to step out and actually walk on the streets of Milwaukee. As a last piece about data you can use that I want to share with you, and this kind of grows out of a discussion that we had in LA, is that I think Katie has really tried to support diversity within our staff. Anyone who was in LA probably remembers the discussion that we had on hiring practices and increasing diversities. And I'd just like to highlight the 5 partners we've had in just 3 years that have brought people of different backgrounds and different education and different interests. And then this is a picture of our team. So thanks to Katie, Gerardo, Mariam, Eric, Don Hutchinson-Weiss, who is a consultant with us and has been doing so much on the tours. Welcome to Milwaukee. Find me if you want a restaurant suggestion that's off the list or if there's something specific you want to do, and anyone on that slide can help you find interesting things to do here.
Thanks to everyone for volunteering to present. We're going to go straight into our next panel specific to Milwaukee. So if you have any questions for the presenters, find them in a camp session or at the reception or any time over the next 3 days.